When I was a kid, I read all sorts of books. I liked serious books about kids having adventures, Enid Blyton, The Mad Scientist Club, the Great Brain books. By far, my favorite author, though, was Roald Dahl. And when I was growing up, I read absolutely every one of his books, from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, James and the Giant Peach, The Twits. My personal favorite was Danny Champion of the World. It's not his most typical book, but for me it was my personal favorite, about this incredible relationship between a father and a son who lived in the English countryside in a gypsy caravan and had all sorts of amazing adventures together. One of the things I liked to do when I was growing up was write my own stories. And when I was 14 years old, I started what became a very long story for me. Usually I wrote short stories, or I attempted these huge science fiction epics that never got completed. But when I was 14, I started a story about a kid like me who was addicted to video games. And I was very much trying to write like my literary hero, Roald Dahl. So I set out and I wrote a 50-page story, typed it up very carefully. That summer I sent it out with my parents' help to a whole bunch of Canadian publishers to see if they wanted to turn my story into a book. And they all said no, they didn't. So this was discouraging, but I didn't give up. And the next summer when I was 15, I decided I'm going to take another look at that story. So I sat down over my summer holidays and rewrote it. And it became a longer story. It became a more interesting story, as stories always become when you spend a little more time on them. And it was about 100 pages long. And I called it Colin's Fantastic Video Adventure. It's about a boy who discovers that on the other side of the screen of his favorite video game, there's another world. And these two little space pilots jump out of the screen one day and they land in his pocket. He makes friends with them and they help him win all sorts of video game competitions. Now, my father was working as a lawyer in Victoria, BC, where I grew up, and one of his colleagues, Michael Butler, actually knew Roald Dahl. They were childhood friends. And Michael Butler knew I was an aspiring writer, and he was going one summer to visit Roald Dahl in England. And he knew what a fan I was of Roald Dahl's, and he took with him a book, one of my Roald Dahl books, one of my prized Roald Dahl books. It was this one, not one of his children's books. It was a collection of stories called Someone Like You, to get it autographed for me. And this was an incredible thrill. He came back, and I had my autographed Roald Dahl. It says, "To Kenneth with love, Roald Dahl, Great Missenden," that's where he lived, 21st June 1983. So this was a huge treasure, childhood treasure for me, an autographed Roald Dahl book, my literary hero. What I didn't also know is that when Michael Butler went to England to visit Roald Dahl, he took a copy of this story that I'd written when I was 15, Colin's Fantastic Video Adventure, and showed it to Roald Dahl and said, "I have this work colleague whose son is an aspiring writer. You know, maybe you could cast an eye over it if you have a few seconds." And Roald Dahl was very, very kind, and he actually took the time to read the story, or at least part of the story, and he must have seen something in it. It's not surprising, perhaps, because I was deliberately going out of my way to write like Roald Dahl. So here he was presented with this story, and he must have thought within sentences, "Hey, this kid's trying to write like me." But he passed the story on to his literary agent. I didn't know any of this until one day in the mail, this very strange airmail letter looked like this arrived in the mail for me. And you have to slit it open. I'd never seen anything like this. And I opened it up, and it was from a company called Murray Pollinger, literary agent. And they just said, "Dear Kenneth Oppel, we're extremely interested in your story, Colin's Fantastic Video Adventure, which Roald Dahl has kindly passed on to us. We are his literary agents. I will come back to you in a couple of weeks' time with suggestions as to how we may best proceed. With best wishes, Gina Pollinger." So I was like completely paralyzed with excitement. I couldn't imagine anything more exciting. Roald Dahl had read my story, he'd given it to his literary agent. It seemed like they were going to take me on as their client. And a couple of weeks later, they did follow up with another letter and say, "We're going to show this around, and we'd like to try and sell it and take you on as one of our clients." So this was incredible. And a couple of weeks later, I got another letter from them saying that Puffin Books in England had agreed to publish the story. So this was my huge, huge lucky break as a writer. And it was all thanks to Roald Dahl for taking the time to read the work of an aspiring writer and pass it on with recommendation to his own agent. So it was by far the most exciting thing that had ever happened to me. And I think on reflection all these years later, the most important thing this experience gave me was not just the published book, but the confidence to think, well, I've written a book and had it published. Maybe I can go on and write a second and a third and a fourth book and make writing my career. Because from the age of 13 on, writing was really the only thing that I could imagine doing happily my entire life. And so fortunately, it's worked out for me, and I've gone on to write many other books since that very first one. But it all started with Colin's fantastic video adventure and a very lucky break indeed, care of Roald Dahl.